Chapter 9. Once someone managed to find and bring me a needle and thread, I closed the bullet hole without issue. Captain McFarley shot me a sideways smile, before instructing a few of the crewmates to take my unconscious patient down below deck for some rest. The pirates cleared the area as their crewmate was carried away, leaving me behind with Grayson.
"Let's get you cleaned up,"
he said, jerking his head at me. I blinked as though coming out of a dream. I felt numb. I looked down at myself. The palms of my hands were almost entirely stained red, smatters of blood rapidly drying down the front of my dress. I nodded and followed him to one end of the ship, where he hoisted up a bucket of seawater for me to wash my hands in. I felt his eyes fix on me as I scrubbed the blood away. I was hesitant to meet his gaze. My heart was pounding, and the longer he looked at me, the worse it got. Why was this happening? This was all wrong. I had been angry with him just a few minutes ago. Hadn't I? Truth be told, I couldn't put a name to what I'd been feeling, but anger didn't seem to fit. Vexed, perhaps. This man was so utterly vexing. The way he went from flirting to treating me like a prisoner at the drop of a hat. The way he was kind to me one moment, and then aloof and stoic the next. Even now, I knew he was analyzing me with those hypnotic eyes of his, most likely wondering why a delicate noblewoman knew how to remove a bullet from a man's leg. I removed my hands and shook away the stray droplets of water, after which Grayson grabbed the bucket and dumped the contents over the side of the ship. I caught him wince as he did, as though the movement had pained him somehow. I frowned, but he was quick to take hold of my arm and guide me back below deck. I hadn't noticed earlier, in the midst of everything else, but as we walked side by side, I realized there was something off in his gait. Was he moving a little slower than usual? Come to think of it, I had managed to outrun him earlier when I'd come above deck, and I suddenly recalled the way he'd staggered when I'd pushed him away from me. I traced my eyes up his leg with a frown, and that was when I noticed the blood staining the side of his shirt. I drew in a sharp breath and stopped in my tracks, taking several steps back from him. "You're hurt," I blurted out. Grayson paused and looked down at his side, almost nonchalantly.
"It's not serious."
"I heard 2 gunshots," I remembered suddenly. "Were you—"
"No,"
he interrupted, rolling his eyes.
"Someone thought they'd be a hero and stuck a knife in me. The second shot you heard was the bastard being taken care of."
His tone darkened, and a chill traveled down my spine. Still, I clenched my teeth in annoyance. Why didn't you say anything? Were you planning to just leave it that way?
"I thought the bullet lodged in Finn's leg was a bit more pressing than my minor scratch,"
he told me with a sardonic smile. I caught the hint of pain behind it, now that I was looking for it. "That minor scratch is an infection waiting to happen," I insisted.
"And why do you care?"
he asked, raising an eyebrow.
"Wouldn't you be the first to celebrate if I dropped dead?"
I opened my mouth to retort, but the words didn't come. As nonsensical as it was, I was insulted that he would think that, though it was a perfectly reasonable assumption, and one that, quite frankly, should have been true. I knew somewhere in my mind that I should just leave it be and let him go on believing I would be happy if he died. But I couldn't keep my mouth shut. At least let me clean it, I offered, before I could reconsider. I've seen men with smaller cuts that have landed them in hospital. He regarded me with his brow raised for several long moments. The wound had to be more painful than he was letting on. Of that I was positive, but he was almost certainly too stubborn to admit it. After a moment, he rolled his eyes again.
Go down to your cabin,
he told me gruffly, then turned and stalked off. I watched him walk for a moment, noting with mounting frustration how clearly he favoured his uninjured side, and let out a huff. Idiot. Fine. If he wanted to let the hole in his body fester, that was his prerogative. Given the cleanliness of the ship, I doubted it would take very long. I did my best not to dwell on it as I went back down the stairs and returned to my quarters. There, much to my surprise, I found that a large wooden chest had been deposited in the middle of the floor. I paused. Was this from the ship they had just robbed? Why was it here? Warily, I knelt and undid the latch. The lid was quite a bit heavier than I had expected, but when I pushed it up, I discovered neatly folded women's clothes within, all relatively new from the looks of them. I blinked, puzzled. Why had they taken a trunk full of women's clothing off the ship? As I understood, pirates were usually only interested in gold and alcohol when they raided. Unless these had been brought aboard specifically for me. Whatever the reason, I was grateful for the opportunity to change into something fresh. Not only was my current dress far too revealing, but it was also getting quite dirty, tattered, and now blood-stained. I rifled through the dresses for a few minutes, and settled on a modest but form-fitting one that seemed about my size. It was a dark red, and still not something that I would have ever been permitted to wear back home, but at the very least it wasn't obscene. I had only just finished getting changed, when there was a short knock on the door, though I didn't have the chance to answer before I heard the creak of the hinges as it opened. I turned to see Grayson crossing the threshold, glancing at the trunk.
I see you found my gifts,
he remarked. I smoothed out a few stray wrinkles in the dress, mouth compressing into a line. Seems a strange thing for you to steal, I retorted, once again allowing my mouth to act before my brain. Couldn't find anything better.
Oh, don't worry,
Grayson said with a grimace.
We got plenty of gold off of them, especially after they decided to be uncooperative. Just thought you might appreciate a change of clothes.
He eyed the old bloodied dress that I had been wearing, lying on the floor a few feet away.
Plus, it makes things easier on me if you aren't walking around dressed like an expensive tavern whore.
I flinched, irritation welling up in my chest. It was hardly my choice, I said weakly. Grayson looked amused by my discomfort, eyes glinting, and my irritation grew upon realizing that I'd let him get a reaction out of me. I ground my teeth together. What are you doing here anyway? I snapped. At this, his teasing smile faded, replaced by mild confusion.
You're the one who insisted,
he reminded me. I blinked at him, and then noticed that he was carrying the half-full bottle of rum from earlier and the sewing supplies. I faltered, caught off guard, as he looked back at me expectantly. He was going to let me treat the wound, then. I wasn't sure whether to be happy about this, or annoyed that he'd chosen to be so ornery about it. Right, I said slowly, glancing around the room, and nodded at the bed. You can sit there. With an affirmative grunt, Grayson made his way to the bed and sat down, taking a swig from the bottle and then relinquishing it to me.
I'll do my best not to pass out,
he said, smiling grimly. I took the bottle, but remained standing. His wound would be simple to close and bandage, I knew. Not nearly as difficult as removing a bullet, at least. But I found a tightness building in the pit of my stomach, and an inexplicable quickening of my heart. I turned and grabbed one of the spare dresses out of the chest, one that was too large for me anyway, and tore a strip of fabric from the hem to use as a rag. You should... My voice broke, and I cleared my throat, quickly looking back at Grayson. You should remove your shirt, I said, fighting down the blush rising to my face. Swiftly, silently, Grayson pulled his shirt over his head, peeling it away from his skin where the blood had dried. I forced my eyes away from his chest, flicking them upwards and around the room as I carefully took a seat on the dusty mattress beside him and tipped rum into the fabric. It wasn't long before I had no choice in the matter. It came as no surprise to see that his chest rippled with clearly defined muscles, flexing ever so slightly in anticipation as he waited for me to begin. It was almost unfair. A part of me had hoped he wouldn't be as attractive as I'd suspected he would be. Now, however, there was no denying that he was handsome in both face and body. And I was left fighting the urge to reach out and touch him. I bit down on my lip and gently pressed the rum-soaked rag against the wound. Grayson tensed, drawing in a sharp breath through his teeth. I started wiping away the dirt and dried blood around the outside, desperately trying to keep myself from staring too hard at places that I didn't need to be looking. I snuck a glance at his face and saw his jaw clenching, but he seemed determined not to give anything away, remaining intensely focused on keeping himself still. I splashed more rum onto the fabric and resumed my task, trying to steady my hands. My heart raced faster every time I felt the cords of his muscles stiffen, and I could no longer stop my eyes from wandering. I followed the outlines of more than a few scars decorating his torso, one of which stretched all the way from the tip of his shoulder to his waist on the other side. Some of them could have come from minor injuries, accidents, but others were clear reminders of battles past. When I began trying to flush out the inside of the wound by trickling rum into it, Grayson finally let out an audible grunt of pain and broke the silence.
What were you doing in France?
He asked, in a strangled voice. I paused and frowned up at him. What? Why?
Because this bloody hurts, and I need you to distract me,
he said through gritted teeth.
So?
I looked down at my moving hands as I considered this request. I was visiting my mother, I admitted. His brow creased.
She doesn't live with you and your father?
No. I shook my head and swallowed, choosing my words as carefully as I could manage while still focusing on my task. She works as a nurse.
A nurse?
His jaw clenched harder.
Is that why... Fuck!
He swore suddenly, as I put a bit more pressure down on the wound.
You're really making me regret coming down here.
A smile slipped onto my face. His London accent had come through just then more than I had ever heard it, but I decided not to mention it. Still, he glanced over at me and caught the expression.
I think you're enjoying this a bit too much,
he complained. I couldn't help myself. I won't deny that it's rather satisfying to see you squirm, I said, setting down the rum and then reaching for the sewing needle. Grayson's mouth twitched, looking very much like it had a response, but he was holding it back. I began to stitch the hole in his side closed, and vaguely wondered again why I was doing this. Just a few hours ago, this man had pushed me to the ground and bound me against my will. Yet here I was, cleaning and treating his wounds. Was there something wrong with me? There must be, I decided, as the recollection of him pulling the ropes tight around me brought a warm feeling to the areas between my legs. I expelled a gust of air from my nose slowly. Had I truly become so starved for company over the course of this voyage that even the slightest interaction was making me feel this way? Or was it just that, somehow, as I watched Grayson wince and stifle grunts of discomfort, he seemed much more vulnerable and human than ever he had before? Finally, after an eternity of struggling to stay focused, I tied off the last stitch, and then tore another strip of fabric from the dress to use as a bandage. I could feel Grayson's eyes watching my every move, and had to actively avoid crossing his gaze as I wrapped the bolt of cloth around his waist. His stare burned into me as I knotted off the makeshift dressing, and even though a part of me knew it would be a mistake, I slowly lifted my head to meet his eyes. I was much closer to him than I'd meant to be, his face mere inches away from mine, and although my instinct was to pull away, I was frozen in place, with my breath stuck in my throat. My body became uncomfortably warm, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why. Grayson's eyes bore into mine, nearly unblinking. Silence. Just as inexplicably as he'd started this staring contest, he ended it, smiling and leaning away from me before slowly getting to his feet.
It appears that I'll live another day then,
he said. I released the breath I'd been holding and stood, legs trembling. As long as you don't aggravate it and tear open the stitches, I told him, trying to clear the haze that was still accumulating in my head.
No promises on that front.
He glanced at the door.
I'd better go and deal with the rest of the mess up on deck. Good night, Miss Williams.
He turned to leave. I felt a pang in my chest, and with a frown and a burst of impulsivity, took a chance and called after him. So we're back to Miss Williams, are we? I asked. Grayson stopped. He looked over his shoulder, brows knitted together, and I watched the gears in his brain turn for a moment. Then, half a smile trickled onto his face.
Good night, Everly.
He corrected himself softly, before leaving me alone, and somehow more breathless than before.